Hello, everyone. Welcome to Ruminate This with Agrarian Solutions. Join us as we explore ruminant nutrition and the impact of mycotoxins. Here, we challenge your curiosity and explore new industry insights and research to optimize your herd's health and performance. All right. Hey, welcome everybody to Ruminate This with Agrarian Solutions. I'm your host, Scott Zaire. We are going to be talking with Dr. Kevin Ziemba from Sexing Technologies. And I'm pretty pumped to have Kevin, you on the call today for a number of reasons. One, though, because we have a little history together, and we might dive into a little bit of that as we get rolling. So, Kevin, welcome to Ruminate This, and appreciate you taking the time. Let's hear a little bit about Dr. Kevin Ziemba. People that might not know, you're currently working with Sexing Technologies, just a little bit about your role there at ST and maybe some backstory as well.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, Scott, and super excited to get a chance to delve into the concept of how genetics and ruminant nutrition kind of can go hand in hand to help a dairy out for sure. So anyways, I guess we'll start with the backwards side. And, my current role with STGenetics is more of like a global support specialist, I guess is the best way to put it. So I do a lot of genetic education internationally. Anything that's going on with the traits that CDCB is, putting forth, new traits or changes to existing traits as far as methodologies or even data sets and accuracies of those traits. So spend a lot of time out in the different aspects of the world, learning what those folks are doing in different parts of the globe to feed our growing population, and what genetic parameters actually matter to them in getting that job done. I also spend a lot of time working with our genetic development team, sire selection, genetic goals, some of the technologies that we're putting forth to create those genetics. So very exciting stuff to be involved with, and to kind of work my way a little bit backwards if it matters to some of the listeners out there. But Scott and I spent quite a bit of time working together for a former company that I worked for, which I hold near and dear to my heart. And in addition to that, I coach the Cornell University dairy judging team, and then do some guest lecturing at some colleges, and previously had taught the genetics class at Cornell. So I'm going to date myself, but I've been at this a while.
That's all right. I think back, Kevin, on some of those years where we were both coworkers, and believe it or not, that was 11 years ago that I started with Premier.
Yeah.
I find it hard to believe it's been that long, but I want to just kind of touch on something because about 2018-ish, I started working in more of a consulting role, repro analysis, beef on dairy kind of stuff. And I visited a farm that you had worked with and probably still do in another state in New England. I'm not going to name drop or get too specific, but I want to share this story to kind of demonstrate some of the lessons I learned from you. So, and believe me, folks, I did not discuss this with him ahead of time, so I'm kind of putting him on the spot.
This is great.
But there was a dairy that you were working with, and they told you, we can't do double live sync. We can't give shots in the pen. It can't be done.
Yep.
And how did you handle that situation, Kevin?
I might have strongly reinforced the fact that yes, you can. And it's a little bit more of getting your proverbial stuff together and saying to yourself, if we want to have reproductive success, we've got to dot the I's and cross the T's. And however that works, we've got to do that, because there are folks out there that are doing that and making that conscious choice to do that and having success. So sometimes you have to choose whether you're going to do it the easy way or you're going to do it the right way. And I've always lived in the space of you got to do it the right way.
I think one of the sayings I learned from you that I still use today, I was on a dairy last week, this week. What's today? It was last week.
Yeah,
And I still use this saying today. Anytime we opt for convenience, we sacrifice success.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. Now, back to that story though, wasn't there something that you did in particular to prove that it could be done?
Did I go out in the pen and give shots or something? I'm not
So
sure.
yeah, if I recall, you spent maybe a week or so up
Yeah.
there. It's not like you were working on the farm
Yeah, I did. That's right.
and just
Now
printed
you're
some lists and
jogging
went
my
out there
memory.
and said, "Hey, it can be done."
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I wanted to share that story because when you're working with people, developing people, so I'm an entrepreneur. I have a couple of small businesses that I run up here too. And when I started my first company in 20, gosh, it's been a long time. I think it was 2004. I started Zare's auction service. So I'm an auctioneer.
Right.
And that was the first time I had employees working for me. And you kind of think, hey, I'm the boss. I can just I can just point and say, hey, you go do this and you go do that because I don't want to do those things, right? I don't want to dig through somebody's attic and have to deal with mice infested boxes. But I learned really quickly that you can't expect somebody to do something you're not willing to do yourself.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
And and so I think that was a valuable lesson that I learned from you is, hey, if you're going to go out and you're going to talk to dairymen and or cattle ranchers, whatever, and you're going to recommend ideas, concepts, things they can do to improve, run it through that test. Would I do this if I were in that position? And I think that's something that I wanted to bring it up. And I think that's an important lesson that I think anybody listening to this podcast could probably take some notes on. But let's dive into the meat and potatoes of what we're here to talk about. And Kevin, when I reached out to you to see if you'd be willing to come on and visit, I had asked you the question essentially with the virgin heifer population in the US at a near all-time low, we need our cows to last longer. I mean, right. There's less replacements, so there puts more pressure on voluntary culling. It is going to require cows to stay in the herd longer. How do we do it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very loaded question, Scott. Thanks for like lobbing it out there with like a big broad paintbrush. Um, yeah, I think there's a lot of factors that go into that, of course. And you have everything from the management strategies. Like I'll back up. I can remember when I graduated from Cornell and would be out doing some consulting work, and a herd would have a average days open of like 135 to 140 and a preg rate of 18 to 21, and we would be sitting there giving them a high five. And in today's world, that would be in the bottom 2 to 5%. So my statement is, management's really improved, and we've got to continue, as we take care of cows, cows take care of us.
Mm,
These herds that and managers and owners who really developed animal welfare protocols that really surround themselves with the concept of making cows last longer and perform all the way throughout their lactations, is incredible. These dairies are doing an incredible job with that. Yeah, I think as these herds continue to develop stronger management practices and following that animal welfare model, we're seeing those cows last significantly longer. What used to be herds that had 40% cull rates because cows couldn't make it to lactation to now herds are are easily seeing, lactation one cull rates independently being in the low 20s. And now we're seeing a higher percentage of cows getting to lactation 3, 4, and even beyond. And so you have the animal welfare, the animal management, the total nutrition package that's going into these cows that are, creating those performance metrics. But the genetics is the engine, right? So that genetic component of what these cows are able to produce has changed substantially. Both from a phenotype of production, but a phenotype of longevity and conformation. You'd never hear dairymen talk about, poor uddered cows anymore. You speak more along the lines of, what's the optimum frame size for a dairy cow in today's environment. And
Right.
just to illustrate that genetic component, I mean, speaking of components,
Oh man.
yeah, right. Like
Oh wow.
it's crazy. And we could say that percent fat and percent protein have increased substantially, especially percent fat as a factor of nutrition, for sure. There's no doubt about it.
There's a huge genetic component to that though.
For sure.
Yeah.
And the baseline of genetics that's been created, people often forget that the heritability of percent fat is like 48 to 52%, depending
Hmm.
on what papers you read, where like pounds of fat and milk pounds are like 21 to 24%. So we can really change the components of the milk products that we create, to help make more solids, in that production pipeline, and that's huge. So you really put into a combination of that genetics and that epigenetics, and then the overall management. Going into it though further, when we get into reduced heifers, I think it's a little bit of a yin and a yang, right? So you have less need for female replacements on the dairy, but we want to make sure that we're still like culling appropriately. Because I can see a few dairies being like, well, the cost of replacements is really high. The cost to raise those replacements is really high. So I'm going to make the least amount I can because the beef cross calf is worth the most at day old.
Yep.
So I'm going to put my margin as tight as I possibly can. And then the next thing you know, um, it's not that the cows can't last long, they can, but some of them we may not want them to last that long. So we've got to play a little fine line with that voluntary culling rate, especially when we get to fourth lactation and beyond, just because she can. I mean, it's a balance, right? Like we want to
Yeah.
have those cows that last super long, but that cow also has to be, a profitable entity on the farm as well. And sometimes newer, younger cows coming in can be a benefit as well. So you got to play both sides of the equation all the time, and no one answer is right every time.
It's a good illustration though, because you could easily see how it would lead somebody to hang on to cows for the wrong reasons, right?
Oh, for sure.
And we see that, I see it, and not to pick on my dad in every episode, but I see that like I use that because I'm close to it, where I asked, well, why are we hanging on to this cow? Well, yeah, she's maybe only given 50 pounds of milk, but she's a good cow. She's pregnant, but she's 300 days in milk, and she's not due to dry off for 2 months. Dad's in a unique position equity wise, and 47 years in farming, he's going to be able to absorb that. But I think when we look at, in the real world, I don't want to diminish what he's done, but I think we look at that from an economic standpoint, and it's like, no, let's not hang on to these cows for the wrong reasons.
Yeah,
Um,
like I work with a herd in Vermont that has a 25% cull rate and milks 1,700 cows. And oftentimes we're having that conversation of, well, how long should we hang on to a certain subsector of calves, and determining, what because they can make a very strong justification, income over feed cost, right?
Yep.
Um, but are they optimizing that income over feed costs at certain aspects? So, it is balance. I mean, this is a little different than what we plan to talk about, but it is part of that discussion because this heifer population topic is very, very tied to the discussion of how we manage culls for sure.
Oh, I think so. And I want to go back to something you said earlier about the fat and protein.
Hmm.
If I were to pick one singular thing to point at and just say, hey, this is what happens at the crossroads of genetics and nutrition. So I had this discussion with a nutritionist not that long ago, and it was here in New York State, and I want to say was it maybe 10 years ago? It was a really big deal if somebody was making 6 pounds of components. And
Yeah.
maybe not, maybe only like actually it wasn't even 10 years ago, like
No, it was not.
2018. This is six
Yeah.
years ago. Like that was a big freaking deal. They passed out awards for it. And I was on a dairy a couple weeks ago, Kevin. They were at 7.6.
Yeah.
Not for the average for the year, but
They
for
hit
that
it.
last like 3 week period. And so one of the companies out there, they have this 6 pound club, this 7 pound club. And I know a dairyman that he was, he got the 7 pound club award, and he told his nutritionist, you keep that and bring it back to me when we hit 8.
Yeah.
And it's not that far away.
Oh no, no, it's definitely not. And it was interesting. You hitting a really good topic because I have a slide deck that I use to illustrate heifer inventory management and genetic progress that can be made within the female population outside of using bulls and genetics on the sires. And it even has in there that this dairy made this amount of progress, and at the end of 2021 they were shipping 6.4 pounds of solids. And I was using it in a presentation, and somebody goes, "Oh, well, they're not that good." And I'm like, well, it is. It's a statement that we're really accelerating that genetics and the way that nutrition amplifies or expresses that genetics. So it's a really great time to be in the dairy industry if we can, you know, make it to the other side of some of the other issues that we're always forced with managing.
Yeah. So, Kevin, on the topic of cow longevity, I liked your analogy. Genetics is the engine, right?
Yeah.
And I view nutrition obviously as the fuel for that. What are 2 or 3 traits, genetic selection traits, that we should really be focusing on to have these longer living cows?
Yeah, so that's an awesome question because I was over the weekend here. I've been working on an index that I'm putting together for a pretty large progressive dairy, and their index is extremely health trait focused, and there's pros and cons to that.
Yep.
The pros, of course, are the benefits of the longevity, health effects, benefits, but we also have to remember that those traits that are typically in those types of indices are lower heritability traits. And not to say they're incorrect, but they're you got to balance. And I think we always have to remember that the traits that are extremely measurable farm to farm, like milk, fat, and protein, have extreme heritabilities because we can measure them, and we can remove as much of variance that's associated with management farm to farm. And when we're talking about overall health, I think the primary trait is productive life. productive life is tied to so many of those other traits. It starts out as a multi-trait, almost like its own index, taking into account, production and fertility and longevity. But then as animals get longer or older and they go into the data, it's sheerly on months of stayability. So, productive life is definitely the measure that encompasses all. When we look at other traits like livability, like productive life is a measurement of direct events of sold,
Yep.
how animals are leaving the herd. So it takes into account cows that leave for low production, cows that leave for hoof health, cows that leave for repro, you name it, udder health, etc. When we get into livability is actually the diet events.
Right.
So there is a little bit of a distinction, but livability is part of productive life, because if an animal leaves, whether it be on a truck or not, it's part of that measure. So sometimes folks will count both of those traits heavily. And what happens is we're almost double counting because they're highly correlated to one another. So I think, though, backing up a little bit, productive life, livability, and the right weighting, and also your fertility traits. Cow conception rate is probably the trait that's got the most application to our US dairy population today. DPR's got a little bit of noise because of the changing metrics of voluntary waiting period, and how we get cows bred has changed immensely over the last 5 to 7 years.
Yeah.
So,
Wow.
so, one thing that, as we're discussing this, and I'm saying it out loud, that we always have to remember is these traits are real world.
Yeah.
Like they're not some people think genomics is just like some data scientist pulling a number out of a hat and throwing it on a piece of paper. And man, all of the phenotypes that our industry has generated, it has made genomics powerful.
Right.
Like that ability to record sold events, diet events, reproductive efficiency, conception rate, milk, fat, and protein is the reason we have those genetic parameters, and we can change them because we can quote unquote measure it. And that's really, really the key part to it. So those would be the traits, that I think would be primary to why cows can last longer, for sure.
I like the fact that you threw in cow conception right there, because it's, it comes back to, at the end of the day, as much as a dairy farmer is in the business of producing milk and producing solids and selling solids, it all happens with a pregnancy.
Sure.
None of it happens without a pregnancy, right? So I always like to view reproduction, or the repro program, as, think of the wheel with spokes, right? You got a hub in the middle, and everything is the farm, but repro has to be the hub, because really, it's, in my opinion, it's what drives everything else, right?
Oh,
Um,
without question. Yeah. Yeah.
so Kevin, so why is it important for producers to manage their genetics?
Hmm. It's their future. I mean, I kind of said it in one of the answers, and I think this is an aspect that doesn't get triggered as much as it should on farm. And we all talk about bulls and genetics and what semen, type and genetics should be used. And
Almost ad nauseum,
uh,
because it's only 50% of the conversation.
yeah, and what really should be talked about more and more is female selection.
Yeah.
Like the dairies out there that we were talking about that are doing 7 pounds of solids, that are managing cull rates, and I'm going to say this a little different, choosing their cull rates. Like
Yeah.
there's dairies out there that have cull rates and they manage around their cull rate. There's dairies out there that choose what their cull rate is going to be because they can.
Yep.
And
Yep.
that is a key factor. And when you do that, these herds put a lot more emphasis on female selection, deciding who has earned the right to make a future herd replacement based on both their genetics and the performance that's associated with that genetics. And so if we can measure the genetic component of that female side of selection, the average industry generational or annual, I should say, increase in net merit dollars is around $70. We'll use that as a simple number. And these herds that are both using good genetics on the sire side, but also putting restrictions on which females get sex semen and are using sex semen to, create those replacements. I mean, they're seeing 100 to 150 net merit dollar gains each year. And, it's like I work with a 5,000 cow dairy, no commercial or no registered cows on the farm. They don't market, they don't do anything, IVF, embryo transfer work, none of that. And they genomic test every female born. And their average, I mean, average, Scott, average net merit that they're getting back every week is like 950 to 3 weeks ago, they hit 996 for their average. And they're seeing that performance. That's the key is the genetic number has to be like, whatever, unless you're seeing it. And I think the key is you see it. Like there's too many dairies out there that just manage cows and they don't think about what their cows are doing, like what their makeup of those cows are. But those herds that get it, like when you go farm to farm, that's the differentiating factor without question. And you try to explain it to one and you're like, yeah, this is what these guys do. And they'll go, yeah, I can't get my mind around it. And I'm like, yeah, it's okay. But know that those guys are hoping you don't get it. And I don't mean that in a mean way, but that's
No,
reality.
it is. And when you visualize that, when I visualize it in my mind, when you say go farm to farm, like, like you, I get on a lot of farms and you totally, like, it stands out like a sore thumb.
Sure.
It's unbelievable. We have a little saying at Agrarian, and it's defend and protect.
Mm-hmm.
So defend that cow, protect your genetic investment.
Oh,
And
sure.
that's really what we mean by it. And yeah,
I'm
I
gonna
think
borrow
that feel free. I don't think we have it trademarked yet, so you might want to hurry.
that.
Um, but yeah, I mean that's wow. And it comes down to, right, it's not really some secret magic potion that's going to make these cows last longer, Kevin. I'm going to actually tease the next episode with you and say a lot of it has to do with that picture above my left shoulder of Vince Lombardi. And I'm going to dive into that a little bit. It'll be a little bit repetitive for some folks, but I don't think we can keep talking about some of this stuff enough. Um, well, Kevin, I think you've given us a lot of stuff to think about today as far as the role that genetics plays. But in a follow-up episode, we're going to dive into more on the management side, but how do we manage the program itself? And so I appreciate you taking time today, and we'll be talking again on the next episode in the future. So, Kevin, thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Thank you for listening to Ruminate This with Agrarian Solutions. Look for our next episode in 2 weeks.